Hey everybody, it's Robbie Bessner. We're back with an amazing episode in our Lyme series. And today, man, if you thought you've heard stuff before, you won't believe what's going to come out from this interview in just a few minutes. I have a dear friend. I've known her for years. She's been studying brain detoxing and brain everything for at least 2 decades. So today we're going to talk about Lyme brain. And I know everybody out there can relate to this in one way or another. So let me bring Dr. Jacqueline Gutierrez to the stage, to Healthy Hotline. Jacqueline, Dr. Jacqueline, welcome to Healthy Hotline. By the way, just before we start, let me tell you how you can get a hold of her. She's got an amazing clinic on the Pacific Northwest area of the country. It's called the Wellness Trinity Clinic, and you can get her at www.thewellnesstrinity.com, or you can email her at Dr. Jacqueline at thewellnesstrinity.com. Hope I said that right. But Dr. Jacqueline, Lyme brain, what a topic. I mean, we all know about the heart-brain connection, the gut-brain connection, the gut-heart connection. And now let's just talk about the brain-brain connection, because it seems like everything comes back to the brain and how it affects us. And you have a unique protocol for all you guys out there that is a 8-step, fully turnkey from the beginning to the end brain detox program that before we're done with this interview, you all have to know about, because it's a game changer. So Dr. Jacqueline, let's talk about Lyme brain. Let's talk about your Lyme experience. But before we go there, just give us a little bit of a backdrop of sort of like about your clinic, how you got exposed to Lyme in your clinic. It's all over the country, so we know it's there. But you particularly have some insights that are super special. So give us a little bit of backdrop of like a little bit about your background, not much, but just enough to get us all at the edge of our seats. And then tell us like what brings you to our discussions today and why you decided to focus on the brain. Why is that so important?
All right. Well, thank you so much, Robbie, for inviting me to this. It's just a really big honor to be amongst all these experts and talking about Lyme. I didn't think I really needed to dive in deep in Lyme in the beginning when I first started all this, until I worked at Cellcore Biosciences for about 9 months, and I kept hearing Lyme all over and over and over again. And I'm like, okay, there's something about this topic that I need to dive in and understand more, because apparently it's a big issue. And so a lot of my research with Lyme started with their work, and I read every article that they had on the website. And the one thing that really struck me was 45% of the country has Lyme. That's about half. And, a lot of times statistics are not necessarily the most accurate, and I think they're actually underneath what they really are. And when you think about the mental health challenges that are going on in society and how much they're correlated with Lyme and their co-infections, it really makes me think this is a lot bigger problem than we're actually saying that it is. So my cerebral detox program gave birth a few years ago when I was really trying to narrow down my niche. And my branding coach was like, Jacqueline, you need to kind of not be all over the place, basically. And when you're thinking that way, it can be very scary, because I'm like, well, I want to help everybody,
Yes.
But, something about mental health really struck me. My dad died of cancer, and a lot of times you think your story is your niche, right? And that was a big part of my story, but I wasn't really quite drawn to cancer as much as I was drawn to mental wellness. And I think part of the reason was now on my mom's side, I came from a family of craziness. So that really, struck a chord in me. I'm like, okay, there's something about this. And this is before 2020 happened. So I started putting this program together, and, all these different pieces of mental wellness kept coming to me. I'm like, wow, these neurotransmitters affect our mood. Our frequencies affect our mood. Flower remedies can help balance us. And when our body's in balance, it greatly affects how we act in society, how much money we make, how our relationships are, et cetera. So to add the Lyme piece on top of that was just, a golden nugget. I mean, that is something that also needs to be dealt with, as well as all these other pieces of the puzzle.
Right. Wow. Really cool. For people that are just tuning in, Cellcore is a company that, Therasage and our company is behind because they make unusual products. And I love their binders, and they've got a full array now, and they keep building on their core programs for both cleansing from parasites and microorganisms, as well as using certain binders that we use in our protocols to help collect the toxins that we liberate with our infrared technology. And so I kind of see that. But this whole brain thing, I mean, I understand why it's important to detox the brain. And from someone that you introduced me to, Dr. Alan Lindsley, I got to understand even more about something that's been intriguing me forever, about how the Lyme spirochete and the co-infections actually act as a carrier or a transporter of mold into the brain. But ultimately, this is the reasons why we have brain fog. This is the reasons why we have emotional changes and so forth. And as you pointed out, the statistics, 45%. I mean, I've been teaching at Hippocrates, the Health Institute in Florida, for 20 years. And 20 years ago, because I have a Lyme background, I asked everybody in my class, how many of you have Lyme or know someone? Maybe one or two out of 50 people would raise their hands. After 10 years, from one or two, it became 30 to 40% of the people in my classes either had Lyme, were there to help themselves from Lyme, or knew a family that had Lyme. And now the numbers are in the 80s to 90 percentile. So these numbers that you're talking about, because Lyme in itself mimics so many other diseases, that there are people that are still walking around in our country that are being misdiagnosed. So they have symptoms of MS. They see the doctor, the traditional doctor that may not be Lyme literate or looking for that, asking the right questions. They say, well, you're presenting like MS, so we're going to treat you for MS. So they're not treating you for what you have, which is Lyme, and they're treating you for what you don't have, which is MS. I can't think of a worse combination than that. So that's why it's so important that we hear from you today and get these insights, because of course, people out there in Lyme land listening today, they can truly appreciate you and the things that you focused on. And so we're so appreciative that you're actually telling us more about this Lyme brain and the Lyme connection. And then of course, giving us some hopeful hints and solutions as to how to work through this. So continue with your discussion, because it's so important.
So, one thing I want to note is between 1993 and 2012, the CDC stated that Lyme disease increased about 300% in high-risk areas in the United States. So that's, how many years ago at this point, but the fact that it increased that much, I mean, we should really be asking, why is this happening? And, from my studies, I could see the correlation largely with the toxicity issue. We are just dumping chemicals in the environment from planes, in our food, in our water, and I mean, everything you can think of. That's why I love your technologies, because I'm like, he's helping clean this stuff up. So anyways, the toxicity is a huge piece of the puzzle. When people have Lyme disease, their immune system is compromised. And that's a lot of reason why these bugs will get out of control. We can coexist with these bugs sometimes, but then that doesn't mean that, we can't get tipped over the edge. And when we have something like toxicity in the environment and in our body, the more that we have toxicity, we're finding a correlation with more Lyme disease as well, too. In the radium belt in the US, there's a very direct correlation. The more that people are being exposed to radium, the more that they're having Lyme disease as well. So Lyme really affects the joints. It loves collagen, it loves protein, and it's really affecting the neurotransmitters as well as that as a result, because they like to eat our protein as well too, and their co-infections. So something I wanted to make a note of is that there's a couple of things that are happening in our world at this point that are causing an escalate. It's not even just back in 2012 and before that. right now, think about last year, 2020 was off the hook, right? There were so many random things, random, I say, because I think they were planned, but that's a whole different, a story in itself. But let's talk about the fires, for example. We had so many fires. I was in the middle of them. It was very scary. I thought I was going to die for many days, and it really tipped my immune system over the edge. So I had to really take care of myself after that. But deforestation is actually there's a book that I read about Babesia, and it was talking about how deforestation is actually causing more Babesia, which Babesia is a Lyme co-infection. Babesia and Bartonella are two co-infections with Lyme that tend to exist with Lyme. And Babesia is a little protozoa. It's a little parasite basically that can get in our cells and rob its nutrients and its oxygen, and eventually it explodes and finds a new place to live. So Bartonella acts pretty similar in that way too. So the correlation with the forest is we are lowering the oxygen in our environment. There's other things that are going on as well too with lowering the oxygen, if you can only guess what we've been doing all year. And so, when we are doing things like cutting the forest down, wearing masks, and anything else that is lowering our oxygen levels, we are creating an environment in our body where these bugs like to harbor and they live. A lot of them like to live in anaerobic environments. Same thing with mold. If people have mold, then they're more likely to have worse issues with Lyme as well too. And obviously the brain fog and fatigue and all that can come with it. So deforestation, so that's one thing. The decrease in wildlife, as we're cutting the forest down, we're also decreasing the wildlife while we're doing that too. So what's happening with these bugs is that they're actually jumping species. So some of these bugs like Babesia have been around for a very long period of time. And now they're going up the food chain and they're coming into deer and they're coming into humans as a result of the smaller species that they might have been living in. So that's another thing that we have to think about. How are we treating our planet? We have to look at this at a macro level if we're going to solve these human issues. And then here's another thing. We have had a lot of people that have lost jobs in the last year and have become homeless. I mean, these major cities in the US, like LA, San Francisco, Portland, I'm very familiar with the West Coast, so I don't know what's exactly going on in your side of the country, but I assume that's happening over there too, probably New York. There's a lot of homelessness. I've never seen this in my life before. I grew up in the Bay Area in California, and it's so sad. I've never saw that growing up, and to see the streets lined with homeless people, and Portland as well. I mean, it's trashed. There's homeless people everywhere, and it breaks my heart. We don't know why they got there, but there's actually a correlation with the amount of homeless people and the lice that they carry can actually carry Bartonella, which is the other co-infection in addition to Babesia that's very common. So those are a couple of things that have been going on in society lately that I believe are just feeding into this. This is another thing that we can think of as a pandemic as well. We did a talk yesterday on parasites, but this is a whole nother side of the story that we have to look at, and if we want people to be healthy.
So I get that. That's the global challenges. The people we're talking today, some of them are laying up in bed because they're having a Herx reaction. Some of them are fully functioning, but they just have episodes from time to time. So they're all looking for optimal health. But all of the people listening in the Lyme world, they're all affected by Lyme brain one way or another, some more than others. As we all know, that these co-infections and the Lyme itself can cross over the blood-brain barrier. Mm-hmm. And so they have a competitive advantage in harboring in places that aren't well oxygenated, like you said, and don't have exorbitant blood flows, so that they can find peace there. And basically, because they are parasites, they're by nature or by definition, they feed off of their host, which is us. Now, for the longest time, a lot of these organisms, microorganisms, the microbiome has somewhat been in balance because of just the way the symbiotic relationships of all these things. And we have more than 60,000 organisms that live in harmony inside of us until of late, really the last decade. We've got glyphosate that's really causing havoc in so many ways in our bodies, environmental challenges, and then everybody out there that's got a symptom at all, but certainly a Lyme symptom. It's a result of toxicity, like you say, and toxicity and inflammation travel on the same highway. Mm-hmm. So if we can lower the toxic burden on the body, it's not necessarily getting rid of the underlying cause of the toxicity, but certainly a lot of these symptoms, food allergies, chemical sensitivities, brain fog, things like that, can start to slowly go away. And all that does is gives the Lyme community somewhat of their lives back, and also buys time for them to go after the root cause and work with their skilled technicians and practitioners and so forth to really go after the underlying cause and create more of a harmonic balance or homeostasis within their own internal environments. Of course, it's individual, it expresses itself differently in everyone, but they still need to understand that there's ways to go about this, to get your life back, in a sense. Mm-hmm. And I think detox is a big word that we use. And here you are, specialists in brain detox. And so being as such, that's a place that is, some people don't really know how to go there. Let's talk more about that. Let's talk about the co-infections. Like, how do they affect the brain anyway? Like, how is it interrupting the neural pathways and all that stuff that creates that brain fog? Talk a little bit about that mechanism, if you would.
Well, I have a couple of theories of why Lyme affects the brain. First of all, these infections, Lyme and their co-infections, they're small and they travel systemically in our bloodstream. So our bloodstream goes all around our body, including our brain. And it can also infect our spinal fluid. And so that spinal fluid can also cross the blood-brain barrier and cause infections in the brain as well that way. So Lyme also damages the nervous system, and the brain is a part of that as well. It produces neurotoxins, which are basically chemicals that disrupt nerve cells. And so those neurotoxins will just throw the brain's chemistry out of balance, and that can cause alterations in the neurotransmitters, which are the chemical messengers that are in our brain that make us happy or sad, or well, if you don't have enough of them, you're going to have the negative emotion associated with it. It can make you focused. It can make you not be able to concentrate. The other side of it. It can give you a sense of bliss. It can help you to calm down when you need to. So we need those neurotransmitters firing if we're going to have our brain functioning right too. And the Lyme and their co-infections, they produce chemicals that disrupt the neurotransmitter production. And certain types of co-infections like Babesia, they actually like protein, which will affect the neurotransmitter production as well. So all that said, this causes brain inflammation. And these bugs will poke holes in the blood-brain barrier, and then now you have leaky brain. So we talk about leaky gut a lot. There's leaky heart as well. Leaky any part of our body can really become leaky. We can have leaky lungs, but we can also have leaky brain. And so the chemicals and everything that's supposed to be inside our brain are not going to be able to function right, and could be leaking into the bloodstream and not being able to do their job. So those are a couple of things. And the other thing is our body is mostly oxygen. It's like 65% oxygen, and about 20 to 25% of that oxygen goes to our brain. So when we have an environment in the body that's low oxygen, we're going to have more of a chance of having Lyme and Lyme co-infections because they like that anaerobic environment. But the other side of it is they can also start to rob our oxygen too. So that really can disrupt the brain as well. And there's a lot of mitochondria that are in all the brain cells. So 5,000 to 10,000 mitochondria in a brain cell, which is one of the most parts in the body where you have mitochondria. And so if you're not producing the ATP because now you have neurotoxins, your brain's just not going to function well. And you also need food, and you need oxygen to be able to produce that ATP in the mitochondria.
Right. So now we've got leaky brain and leaky everything. We have the neurotransmitter interruption. So basically, the neurotransmitters and the synapses between each of your neurons or your nerve endings is the spark that communicates the information that the brain is trying to send to your body, your organs, your muscles, all of your systems to work. So if those synapses, if there's an impairment in that neurotransmitter, then half, a third, maybe none of the information is going to where it's got to go. Mm-hmm. So the brain is kind of got its function in place, but it can't get the information out in order for the body to respond appropriately, which could lead to or could be a cause of a suppressed immune system, for instance, and things along that nature, which plays into the hand of and creating more of that imbalance. So it allows these little, bad boys, I call them, the bad bugs, to have an upper hand and create more havoc, and then do what they're created to do. Essentially, they're perfect organisms. They feed off of a host, so they take your food and your life resources and rob you of your energy. They have one main function, which is to replicate. And the second is using your life resources, and they poop, right? That's the
Lyme
thing.
poop.
And the poop is the neurotoxin, making us more toxic. So all of those three things, perfect for the organism, not so great for us. And when you have impaired brain function and you have impaired system function, then you can't detox properly. Detox pathways are clogged up. As you already pointed out, you're lowering your oxidative load in your blood or creating more oxidative stress, okay? And so all those things will lead to continued imbalances. So I love where we're going. And one of the other things I wanted to mention is sleep. I mean, it impairs your sleep and everybody's biorhythms, their Krebs cycles, all that stuff is all off, which again plays into the hand of these microbes and works against us and our overall health. So let's start to focus a little bit on some of the solutions. So we kind of got the problem. We understand the problem more. Now let's dive into some of the things that you've done creatively in your clinic that you've got such great results from and for, helping the brain detox, getting that house of cards back in order. Give us some tips as to the best ways to start and what can we expect in a realistic time frame.
So based on the person, it's going to be different from one person to the next. I mean, when someone comes to me, it's like it's a new project in and of itself, right? So we have to see what is their toxic load, what heavy metals do they have, what type of other chemicals do they have mold, do they have parasites, which I believe everybody has parasites. It's really just about how much, and actually really all of that. I think people all have some form of all those different types of infections and toxins to a certain extent. But being able to identify how much of the toxic burden that someone's already dealing with can be so key, because I think a lot of times when people are not doing that, they can really just spin themselves around the mountain and wonder why holistic health is not helping them when it actually can, because they're not really dealing with the whole picture. So one, obviously identifying is key. I think there's a lot of things that people could do without even doing that, but at some point you want to make sure you do some testing. And depending on the type of thing that we're trying to look for, there's better tests than not. Like Lyme and parasites, forget it. Don't even do lab tests. It's not really something that is, they're not the most reliable. By the time you actually see them on labs, you're already foregone, and there's a lot of people that are dealing with these issues that, it's already manifesting and you can't see it on a lab. So I don't even do those with my clients. We look more into biofrequency testing and as well as doing muscle testing. And I do a thorough intake questionnaire to see where there are, with the Lyme, but also with other types of infections and toxins too. So we can see which place we need to focus our attention. But biofrequency scanning can be so amazing when it comes to this type of work. You can see, you know, depending on the type of biofrequency scans you do, you can see all the different types of Borrelia that you have and Babesia, and you can see the heavy metals, and you could get super specific on what it is that's going on inside of the body. I like to couple my testing. I like doing labs, a thorough intake, and the frequency machines, as well as doing muscle testing when appropriate and you know, allowed by the client as well too. So that's obviously the first step. I'm sure a lot of your other guests probably talked about that to a certain extent. The other thing we have to think about too is that Lyme and parasites, they affect our immune system in a different way. So we have this Th1 and Th2 immune system, and Lyme is affected by, is helped with the Th1, and parasites by the Th2. So if we have a high parasitic load, which a lot of people do, then we're not going to be able to fight the Lyme as well. So we have to lower that parasitic load so we can deal with the Lyme as well too. So that's something that is very important when people are dealing with Lyme. You're not going to fully get rid of the Lyme unless you get rid of the bug that it's living into, as well as be able to balance that immune system. And then the next thing we really want to think about, so you touched on sleep. The brain drains when you're sleeping. And we have this lymphatic system in our brain. It's basically the lymphatic system in our brain. And a lot of infections are fought in the lymphatic system. Well, the lymphatic system, it drains while we're sleeping. How many people do you know are getting enough sleep? You know, this is a big problem in America, especially. We have just been conditioned to just be go, go, go all the time. And let's just fill up our agenda from night to day with nonstop activities. And we have to, you know, hustle and bustle to survive. And so we are living in a very sympathetic dominant society, and we don't value sleep as much as we need to. So I think, you know, when people get sick, a lot of this is really a mind game in itself, because it's like we've been living a certain way and conditioned to do certain things to survive and thrive and keep up with the Joneses. And so when you say it's time to sleep, it can sometimes for some people be like, first of all, they don't even know how to sleep because their body can't calm down. So we'll talk about that. But also it's like, okay, now you have to plan your sleep. Like I literally have alarms that tell me, okay, Jacqueline, stop working. It's time to wind down. So in terms of sleep though, insomnia is a huge, huge, huge problem. And I've noticed, you know, a couple of things that are associated with that. Obviously, the Lyme and their co-infections can cause issues. Parasites will wake you up between 1 to 3 in the morning. It's like, that's when they want to have a party and replicate. If you have itchy butt, that's a sign that there's parasites too. And so the infections obviously can cause issues, but also deficiencies. So the infections can cause deficiencies because they're eating your food. And, you know, even if you are eating enough of it. So sometimes people can really find that they can actually sleep better in the beginning of their protocol, especially when they're using nutritional supplements to address different deficiencies like magnesium, calcium. I'm not a big fan of just giving calcium without doing a hair test, because it's not really the best thing for anyone to take. But if you're a fast metabolizer, then you have that deficiency, then it is something good to take, and that could help with people's sleep. And as well as tryptophan. So tryptophan helps to build serotonin, and that helps to build melatonin. And melatonin is secreted by our pineal gland. And if our pineal gland is not secreting that melatonin, we're not going to sleep very well. And melatonin is very detoxifying for the brain as well. So that's, you know, some nuggets about sleep. You also have to have your brain, your neck draining as well, because, you know, you have this head, and before these toxins come out through your bowels and your urine, you have a neck that it has to go down through. So people have infections in their neck that sometimes will compromise their brain drain as well. So one of those things is we got to flip off that sympathetic dominant mode and get into a more parasympathetic state where the body is that's where the body heals best. And that's where we should literally be about 80% of the time. It sounds really off the hook when you're thinking about American lifestyle, but being able to figure out how do we live in society and be able to still have that calm and peace, like you're very good at, Robbie. I feel like no matter where, no matter when I talk to you, it's like you're so calm. So that's what we have to have if we're going to be healthy and heal.
Well, to simply put what you talked about, because some people don't understand what's the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic versus being sympathetic dominant or parasympathetic. Sympathetic state is really a brainwave function, and it's that fight or flight. It's being anxious, sort of at the edge of your seat, always being edgy, irritable, things like that. That's the way you would express it. And the parasympathetic, the opposite, is more of the calm state. And so what you're telling us, and I'm sure everybody out there can relate to this, that where we should be 80% calm and 20% excited, we're actually the other way. We're like, and now with the restraints with COVID and the changes in our lifestyle and lifestyles that basically happened overnight. No one sent us out the memo, this is going to happen. We weren't really prepared. And so there are things you can do to shift it back the other way. But the first thing that I guess from this discussion is to identify that it's not healthy to be always at that anxious state. And sometimes when they say sympathetic dominant, it means we kind of get stuck there. And the brain kind of says, oh, okay, this is the new normal. You want me excited all the time? Wow. But that upsets all the harmony in the other parts of our systems that really operate better when you're in a calm state. So that is not normal. And we actually have to work a little bit. First part is knowing that we have a little challenge there. So thank you very much for bringing that up today and illuminating that to our audience. But, it may sound very complicated or complex, but the simple things to do to shift that way of the way your brain could be just something in the way you breathe, or doing things like yoga, for instance, where you're in the breath, but you're also doing a little bit of body work. Guided meditation is a wonderful way to bring yourself into that calm state. And so I practice that every day. I do it when I'm in my sauna in the morning. It's my time. The world isn't, generally it's 4 or 5 in the morning and the world isn't up yet. So I'm not inundated with, daily challenges, but it does give me an opportunity to ask for forgiveness and focus on what I'm grateful for and set my intentions for the day. And other ways are, I know you're so spiritually grounded. Just go back to your faith, read the New or Old Testament, find or follow someone out there like Joe Dispenza is one I really love, that just offers so much insight in how to create a really great internal environment emotionally, and again, that spills over to the physical side. So that's the piece on calming us down, and I think that's super important. And thank you so much for bringing it to our attention. Yes, we've got these bugs, and they get excited around full moons. So if you see that you're extra anxious around full moons, and many women, their menstrual cycles are tied to the full moon. So now you've got menstrual things going on, plus you've got parasite stuff going on. Oh my God.
That's a very common thing with not only the Lyme spirochetes, but Babesia and Bartonella. They all can cause anxiety and even panic attacks. And it's interesting. Like you can see, some of the things that are associated with that is seeing lesions, like brain scans can see lesions in the brain, but as well as on the amygdala. And then the other side of the amygdala is that it can become enlarged. The more that we're practicing fear or absorbing it, we can get stuck into an amygdala hijack is what they call that. And so when you're stuck in that fight or flight response, how do you think that your body is going to be responding in terms of its health? It's not ready to rest. It's not ready to heal. It's not trying to digest your food. It's not trying to reproduce. I mean, there's a lot of fertility challenges that are going on as well. And these bugs are very intertwined with that too. So, dealing with that amygdala is going to be huge in turning off that fight or flight response so that people aren't feeling so anxious as well.
Right. We use heart rate variability very often to just try to be able to discern where those changes are. There's a great group out there. It's free. You can go on the internet called Heart Math, and you can kind of look at some of their teachings. And also we like the breathing techniques of Wim Hof. And there's a Russian guy that has a great breathing technique. It takes 4 minutes. That's it. You're feeling anxious. You just spend 4 minutes and just calm yourself down through breathing. Rock your world. Amazing.
Yeah.
Earlier, you talked about frequencies and biofrequencies that they use for testing and also in a way or a method for in therapy. Could you just expand upon that? Because, we're all energy beings. And so, we're talking about brain energy now and brain frequencies. And now you've got devices and techniques through your clinic and through your own studies that can lock on where the challenges are. I mean, it's amazing for me to think that you can use a vial and muscle test and understand not just that you have Lyme or co-infections, but which ones you have, what strains you have. Mm-hmm. So just unpack that a little bit for the people out there that don't quite understand what that means.
So frequencies are something that has to be thought about when people are trying to heal of anything, really. I'll tell you a quick story. I had a lot of parasites myself. And once I started really going at them, I was really surprised to see a lot of them come out. And within a month, they kept coming and coming. And it was just like, seriously, is this ever going to end? So 6 months later, I'm still seeing these things come out. And I'm like, this is just ridiculous. Like, when is this going to end? And, the quality of our questions leads to the quality of our answers. And it's one thing that I've learned. And in that moment when I was like, God, seriously, I need to know this answer. Am I going to have to be taking parasite herbs for the rest of my life? And obviously I'm dealing with the toxic burden as well. So there's that. And maybe I do have that many bugs. I don't know. But the fact that I could keep seeing them come out was just ridiculous in my book. And so the answer that I got at that moment was, you have to get rid of the frequency that is causing them to proliferate. And, part of that is there's several pieces to the puzzle probably, but a big part of that is dealing with the emotions that are associated that have attracted these bugs in the first place. We were talking about energy vampires, and, these can come through people obviously, but we can have all these different emotions that happen throughout our life. And I studied the emotion code, and you can actually identify through muscle testing when specific types of emotions happened in your life, whether it was from an energy vampire or maybe you experienced some type of other trauma in your life, or, it can be different depending on what the situation is, or what emotion is you're dealing with. But through a series of muscle testing, we can identify is basically like we're talking to the subconscious mind. Our subconscious mind stores everything. We have different parts of our brain that are conscious and we can remember. But a lot of times when people go through traumas, they're not very conscious about their past. Like my dad died when I was, let's say 9 years old. I actually don't even really remember much of my childhood before that. And it's really interesting. But what can happen is that our subconscious mind does remember these like everything that happens in our life. It's like a movie script that is imprinted in our mind. And so the muscle testing allows us to identify, let's say we had anger. I've been dealing with a lot of anger challenges with my clients, and anger can really affect our heart. And, it can affect other pieces of our body because everything is connected as well. But what we could do is, okay, we find anger is an issue. We could see what age that it happened. And there's a certain amount of information that we'll need to find, because what's happening is the emotions kind of coming to the surface in our frequencies, and then we can release them with rubbing magnets down our governing meridian, which starts between our eyes right here and then goes along our head all the way down to our tailbone. So any part of that can be rubbed with magnets to be able to help release that frequency. And, the whole quantum field, I don't know if you got a chance to interview Veronica Leslie yet, but she takes the whole quantum thing to another level. I can't explain exactly how this is working completely, but I can do this remotely. And I have had clients where in that moment, they feel the energy shift. They could feel the pain that was in their chest and their back go away. And, with Lyme, that's a common thing that we see is pain. And so to be able to identify any type of emotion that is related to that pain, it can be very critical. Basically, like I like to say, God heals how he wants to heal. And so if that's the solution, then we need to address the frequency level as well. And, when I'm doing that, it really is like one long prayer. I'm asking for guidance. I'm, and I just feel like throughout the whole time, it's I'm just being guided to the answers of what the person needs to release. And so I've seen people, like, they could feel the shift while I'm doing it as well. And besides like getting rid of pains, it's like it's almost like they could feel the magnet running down them too, even though I'm doing this remotely. So anyways, we can be carrying burdens that are not ours to carry, and that disrupts our immune system, and it disrupts our frequencies, and it can invite energy vampire, literally, people in our life too, and it can invite illness as well. It can disrupt our financial situation. I notice a lot of times when people have illness challenges, there's a lot of times a financial challenge too. And so I notice the big thing when I'm working with people on a frequency level, it affects everything around them, not even just their health. So,
right. And also the people around them too, right? So that draws on
some
that.
people will start to leave that don't belong.
Yeah. Pain is an interesting issue because we have body pain. Many of the Lymies out there listening, they all feel that. They feel neurological shifts. They'll get tingling. They'll get pins and needles. It'll feel like people are poking them with needles or pieces of glass. I've heard many different ways it's described. And then there's this emotional piece, could be emotional trauma that happened sometime in your life. So you just articulated one in yours. It's natural. If we were living in a very high state of pain, like what's called breakthrough pain, where if it was a stereo, the volume, and it goes up to 10 on the stereo, the volume would be 9, 8 or 9, so loud that you can't focus on your work, your family, your bliss, your purpose, your love, things you love in your life, because the pain is so strong that it's overbearing. Mm-hmm. So what the brain does is it kind of sweeps it under the carpet because it can't function in that high threshold of volume of pain 24/7. And that's what you talked about. Like, you actually had an emotional pain block where you can't really remember earlier than 9 because you had this trauma. So that trauma was so impactful for you that it muted all of that history before it, trying to create the new normal so that you could survive. Mm-hmm. It's a defense mechanism.
Exactly.
And we all have it in some degree. But the Lymies out there may have it even more because they're dealing with this imbalance inside, plus all the other external influences and stresses, and then whatever their genetic proclivities are. That, it's a really interesting conversation. But it does come back to brain health, detoxing your body, and creating sort of a better level playing field. I really love that. I love the fact that you can decide or discern these things with frequency techniques, and that ultimately we all are frequency, made of frequencies in one way or another. And then just using magnets and focusing on the vagus nerve and the channels, that the governing channel is so important for settling down. So I do that very often. In my own therapy, just 12 strokes like this. I don't even use magnetic fields, but that's also really strong. Sometimes I'm using essential oils, or I'm using paramagnetic materials that we farm from the earth that radiate frequencies. And I just put them in. I've got a little vial, and I put it in my vial, and I just run the vial down my governing, and it calms me down, and just brings me back to myself, to my center. Mm-hmm. So it does take a little bit of work. But I'll tell you something else about emotional healing. And I've gone through my own journey personally and in different ways, and working and coaching with people. The fastest shift in your physiology is emotional. Like when you can just do Ho'oponopono, the Hawaiian ask for forgiveness. You can go through a few of those simple rituals and do some simple affirmations that are specific to your needs. Of course, having a coach like you, and someone that studied emotional code, that understands techniques, tapping. These are all ways to actually settle down that emotional block. And once that block is released, it's incredible. Like Louise Hayes, her whole work has been built around emotional traumas and expressions and emotions that translate into physical expressions. So when we ask that forgiveness, boom, that block is cleared. And then now it's amazing how your physical shift will occur also. So I'm really happy that you went there. And I'm also happy to tell everybody out there that you can do this virtually. You know, can people call you and you can work with them virtually to help coach them through these things? Are you set up to do that?
Yeah, every single thing I do is virtual. So I used to have an office, and before COVID even happened, that whole thing last year, I actually was led to just not have the office space anymore and do everything online. And, I think part of it's my female instincts are kicking in. I want to be near my family and possibly have some children in the future. So I feel like that's setting the stage for not being all over the place. But yeah, I really enjoy working online and be able to tap into work with everyone around the world. So
super. It's great to know, because a lot of people out there, first of all, sometimes they can't physically get to you. And to have the idea that they can tap into your research, your knowledge, and heal, go through your 8-step program for brain detoxing, do this frequency balancing is super cool. Wow. We've actually run over our time, but I'm so drawn into the information that you're imparting today. Before we finish, is there something else that we might have left out that you'd love to cover before we have to go today?
Well, part of when we're dealing with issues with the brain, obviously you have to get rid of the things that don't belong. So, there's amazing tools like Cellcore, your light therapy is incredible, infrared light therapy. The other side of it is you have to be able to rebuild the tissue as well. And so there's something called neurogenesis, where you can actually rebuild and grow new neurons. And then the other side of that is neuroplasticity. So you can actually rewire your brain. So that's a very important piece of the puzzle too, is being able to rebuild the brain tissue, but also rewire your brain for success. I think a lot of times people get stuck in a program because their brain is just constantly in that negative, like, oh, I can't do this, I can't heal, etc. But once they start rewiring their brain toward success, then their body can actually heal as well. And so that's something that I wanted to lead off on, leave the audience on is, don't just think about getting rid of the bad thing, but also what are the things that you need to do to include in your life? And also, how do you rebuild your brain so that, we don't invite these bugs in our life anymore? My goal with clients is to not only get rid of the bad thing, but let's create a future for this to not have to happen again.
Wow. How powerful is that? And rewiring is interesting because it sounds like it's electrical. Let's connect these dots from here to here. And it's somewhat, in many ways it is, but we're talking about negative thinking. Like in the quiet time of the day, we all have these thoughts, and words, things you articulate, out loud, are very powerful, but so are the words that are not said out loud, that are just the negative thoughts or the toxic or negative people that are around us that are feeding us with negative words or negative thoughts. Mm-hmm. And so there's a little skill set involved with understanding how to do that. And that's why I love working with you and talking to you, because you're an expert and a coach at that. So you can identify the kinds of language that we use on a daily basis and say, well, you could say it that way, but the healthy way to say the same thing is by saying it this way, which is more an affirmative statement and a positive growth statement that's reinforcing your health, as opposed to ones that might be negative, kind of keeping you down. And, it's easy when you're not feeling well to think negative. That's so easy to do. And people feel bad for you that you feel that way. And they sort of feed into the sympathy side of it. But the strong ones, the fighters, the weekend warriors, the people that really, have the will to live, okay, they find a way out. And you're giving us the tools to do that. And that's so important to understand, that we're not alone, that there are ways out of this, and that it's one step at a time, and we can do this. And it's amazing that you've developed a whole understanding of it, and you're willing to share that with us today. So Dr. Jacqueline, you're amazing. Thank you for joining us. The Healthy Hotline does it again. Jacqueline Gutierrez, what a great all-star you are. We appreciate you so much. Thanks for the good work and the wisdom that you shared with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey everybody, it's Robbie Bessner. Thanks so much for joining us today. Please share this content with anyone that you think might benefit from it, and we're looking forward to having you with us tomorrow for another great interview.